Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another lesson from our series that we've been working on for quite a while now called How the Story Ends. We've been in the book of Revelation the last few weeks, and we are finally at the point of taking a look at kind of God's parting shot with final information for us that we need to know about how the story ends of the story of the Bible, the story of human history, the story of God's redemption of the earth, and the redemption of humanity. And it all kind of comes to a head right here in the book of Revelation. And while Revelation can be a complex book to study and to understand, we've already talked about some of the principles for interpretation. If you go back in earlier weeks, you'll kind of get an overview of that. So you know kind of how I'm approaching these passages and how I'm going to try to take us through them. But here we are. We looked at chapters 1, 2, and 3, which is kind of gives a description of the first appearance that Jesus had with John, where he showed up in person and what John saw about Jesus. Then we have 2 chapters of messages Jesus had to send to churches during the time of John that kind of give you a little bit of an insight into what the church during that part of the century was struggling with, and also kind of setting the table for some of the themes coming on later in the book. And last week we finally got to chapter 4. And in chapter 4, John's vision of the future finally begins. He gets called up into heaven, and if you remember in chapter 4, there's this, really nothing happens as far as activity. There's no actions that happen. It's merely John in heaven looking around, and he sees everything for the first time, and he's pretty blown away and pretty dazzled and overwhelmed, as you might imagine. The first thing he notices is a throne and someone who is seated on the throne. He describes it with the most incredible physical imagery you can imagine, trying to capture into words what he's seeing. He talks about 4 living creatures. He talks about 24 elders who are there kind of around the throne, surrounding it. And these 4 living creatures especially seem to be identified with the seraphim in Isaiah chapter 6, who seem to be guardians of God's holiness and proclaimers of God's holiness. And there's a lot of worship happening in heaven. And the point of all of it, of course, is that whatever is happening in heaven is happening for God's purposes. It's happening for God's pleasure. And everything that we're about to hear in the story, when the action finally gets started, when the scene gets rolling, will be because God is trying to seek the glory for himself. And all of heaven is prepared to worship him for the great way that he is going to now bring the story of humanity to its appropriate conclusion. So that's chapter 4. But like I said, nothing has really happened. So today I want to spend however much time this takes to take a look at Revelation chapter 5. Now, just to warn you, Revelation chapter 5 is perhaps one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible. So I get a little bit revved up, I get a little bit fired up, because in some ways it's just a beautiful capstone on the entire New Testament. The entire New Testament, and really, when you see the New Testament as the capstone of the Old Testament, especially the Old Testament prophets, it's really the capstone of the entire Bible, because it brings us to a really beautiful moment where we start to see who Jesus truly is, which is what Revelation is about. Remember, this is a revelation of Jesus in all of his character and all of his glory, not just a revelation of end-time events. This is a revelation of Jesus. And so chapter 5 beautifully reveals Jesus to us and his place inside of God's story and in the story of humanity. And it's just amazing. So I can't wait to dive in with you. And I hope you'll open up your copy of the Bible right now to Revelation chapter 5. We're going to jump maybe to a couple other passages, but we're mostly going to be right there in Revelation 5 for the rest of our time this morning. Now, before I dive into the notes, I want to tell you there are brand new notes that are available. If you're here in person, they should have been stapled and left there on the table for you as you came in. And you can obviously grab one of those, and I hope that you're following along as you read this, as you watch this, For those of you that are watching online and weren't at church today, basically, you go to our church website, fbchh.org. There's a resources tab. Halfway down, you'll see ABF notes. You click that, and they should be brand new ones, and you'll know because it says at the top, the book of Revelation continued, important emphases in Revelation 5. Okay, and it's just 2 pages. There's a little circle diagram that you'll see on the screen behind me that we'll fill in a little bit later and kind of talk about all the things that are happening here in chapter 5. Okay? So that's where you find the notes. I hope you get the notes. I hope you have your Bible, and I hope you're ready to go, because this is where it starts to get really interesting. And the way I started this off here, the first little subpoint is, finally, the action begins, right? Up until now, it's just been setting the stage. It's introducing us to some of the main characters, which is very important. It's very important to know where we are and what kind of a setting that this is. And there's God on his throne, and just letting the awe and the wonder and the majesty and the power of that just kind of wash over us like the waves, crashing waves of the ocean. Like, that's necessary. We need to kind of take on John's sense of awe and wonder as he looks at this scene. But now we come to chapter 5, and the action begins. The story is really going to get rolling from here on out. And once it starts here in chapter 5, it doesn't stop rolling until it gets down to the bottom of the hill. And at the bottom of the hill, the kingdom of God has come, and human history has come to its conclusion. Okay? So it goes fast from here on out. And we're going to try to take time to look through these various chapters that we still have to go here in the book of Revelation. And I'm going to do my best to try to make sense of it for you. And for myself, because this has been fun for me to kind of re-study and clear up some of the confusions even that I've had as I've looked at the book of Revelation in the past. So anyway, the action begins. And let's start by taking a look at something new that John notices in this heavenly scene in verse 1. Okay? Verse 1 says this: "Then I," John's talking, "then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll, written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals." The scroll. So, what is this scroll? That's what we're going to get to in a minute. But first, I want you to notice the way this scroll is described. It's described as being in God's right hand, or John uses the longer expression, in the right hand of him who sits on the throne. But everybody knows, who's read any part of the Old Testament, that the person seating on the throne is Yahweh. It's God himself, right? We would call him, in New Testament terms, God the Father. And Israel in the Old Testament would have called God their Father as well. But obviously they didn't have an awareness at that point about how God the Son was going to come into the picture. But anyway, they know from Isaiah 6, from Ezekiel 1, from probably 10 other passages in the Old Testament, that the one seated on the throne is God. So in your head, as you're reading this and studying this, especially since we've taken months to get to this point of understanding all the Old Testament context, when you see the person sitting on the throne, you just can substitute in your head Yahweh, God, okay? So in God's right hand. Now, what is that significant? When I show it to you, it's going to look like my left hand, but this is my right hand, okay? This is my right hand. And in the Old Testament and in the Bible times, to be at someone's right hand means you're the next in line. You're the right-hand man. You may have heard that expression. You're the number 2. So there's the person and whatever's at his right hand, and that is always meant to be the position of power and authority. If you remember, James and John come to Jesus back when he was still in his earthly ministry, or I should say James and John's mother comes to Jesus, and they ask for permission for James and John to sit one at his right hand, right? One at his right hand, and one at his left. And the idea is they're going to be the two. Mom is asking for James and John to be kind of like the number 1 and the number 2 next in line after Jesus, or the most powerful people in his kingdom. So the fact that this scroll is in God's right hand implies a few things, okay? And I've got a couple blanks there for you to fill in. It means that whatever this scroll is, it's in God's right hand, which means it is under his power, that's the first blank, and it's under his authority, okay? He holds it in his right hand, the hand of power and authority. He has authority over it. He has power over it. Whatever is written on this scroll, presumably, is written by God himself. Now, if you know anything at all about the way the ancient world communicated, they didn't send email, no texting, no video chats, no Snapchats, no Instagram posts. They didn't even have letters that they would write to each other in the strictest sense. They would get parchment, or later on, it came to be papyrus, or basically really thin, like paper, but made from reeds. Basically, they would, and again, I'm not a scientist, but I've known, people have told me that that's the way they did it. They would take reeds, slice them really thin, and there was this process to stretch it out, and you could write and curl it up. Well, this scroll is probably some kind of an animal skin that's been dried, and then you would, with ink, write on one side. Notice it's written on the inside and the back. Notice there's a lot in this scroll. There's not just a little bit, there's a ton of information. In fact, everything that we get revealed to us in the next, 15, 16 chapters, that's a lot of information. So here's a scroll, and it's scrolled up, and whatever is written in it, God has written, and whatever has written in it, he gets to decide who gets to read it. He gets to decide who it's for. It's a punishable offense if you intercept somebody's scroll that they're sending from one person to another and you open it when you're not supposed to. Just like today, if I go to your mailbox and take your mail out and open your mail, that's actually a federal offense. That's a crime, because mail is only supposed to be given to the person it was intended to be given to. Well, the scroll is like that. It's a message from God to somebody. Somebody is authorized to take it, and nobody else is authorized. That leads me to the next thing. You'll notice that it's described as being sealed with 7 seals, okay? What that means is that remember, a scroll is rolled up parchment, right? So you take it and you would pull it open a little bit and read some of it, and then there'd be a seal that would protect you or prevent you from seeing any more of it. So you'd have to break that seal, and you could pull it open a little bit more, read a little bit more. You break the next seal, and so on until you come to the end of the document. So it's got 7 seals, which means it's really long, okay? And it's also something that the writer of the scroll wanted to make sure didn't fall into the wrong hands or were seen by the wrong eyes. This is what I'm calling, the blank here, confidential information for your eyes only. Not just anybody is authorized to look in that scroll. There is someone that this scroll is addressed to, and that person has the right to look at it, but nobody else does. All right, and the fact that it's sitting there, it's in the right hand of the one on the throne, that means it's under God's power and God's authority, and it's sealed up. It's not just for anybody to see. John isn't like doing one of these things like my kids do, reading my emails over my shoulder when I get an email at home on my phone. Not that they do that all the time, don't worry. Don't worry about it. Anyway, the 7 scrolls, 7 seals, is a way to keep the information confidential and to keep it protected and safe so that only the intended recipient will be able to open it and look at it, or at least without us knowing. Because if they break the seal, we'll know somebody's looked at it who shouldn't have, okay? So the question is, what is this scroll? What is it? What's written in it? What's written on? Because we don't ever find out what the words are that are written on this scroll, except if you take a look with me down at chapter 6, and we'll get there next week in more detail, but just take a look at what happens when these scrolls get open or these seals get broken. Verse 1 of chapter 6 says, "Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say, with a voice like thunder, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer." So the Lamb breaks the first seal, opens up the document part way, and when that happens, when he opens it, something happens down on earth. Remember, we're looking at the vantage point of heaven down to earth. We're not looking at the security camera footage from down on earth. What this looked like to Johnny Q. Public, who's just walking around on his, doing his everyday job, and he looks around and sees these events happens on earth. We're looking at it from heaven's vantage point. So the Lamb breaks open that seal, and as he breaks open that seal and reveals some of the information, things actually happen down on earth. So this isn't just a normal message where you read it and go, okay, thanks for the info, I appreciate it. There's actually things that happen in real time on earth when this scroll gets opened up. Okay? So it's not just information, but things are happening down on earth. And the goal of this, as you see from all 7 of these seals, it takes humanity closer to the end of the story. Okay, so it's actually the way the story continues to move forward. Here's the way, a word picture that I'm using to describe what this scroll is. Okay, and here's a blank for you to fill in under what is this scroll. Second point. It is God's script for the final act of the human story. Script, okay? Now, I didn't do a lot of acting in college. I did do a small play one time, and I was handed by the director my first day, kind of as a part of the team, I was handed a script. That script has everything, all my dialogue, but it also has all the descriptions of all the action in the story. And if you look at that script, it has the entire story laid out. And it's usually broken into a series of what they call acts. Acts 1, the first act of a play, that's when everybody gets themselves into all the trouble, right? The second act, they tend to muddle the trouble and some of the stuff gets worked out. They try to solve the problems, but it doesn't really work. And they leave the end of the second act kind of still in limbo with all these loose ends untied. And then the third act is usually when all the tension gets solved, all the conflicts get settled, all of the loose ends get tied up, all the conflict is resolved, and the good guys win and the bad guys lose, or, depending on if it's a tragedy, the opposite, Romeo and Juliet, warning. But either way, the third act is when the story comes finally to a conclusion. What I believe this scroll is the script for the final act of the story of humanity. You go back to Genesis 1, and you read all the way through the life and the ministry of Jesus, and then the Acts of the Apostles. And that's Acts 1 and Act 2. That's where you have the major acts, the things, the history of Israel, the ups and the downs, the obedience and the disobedience, the kings who did well and the kings who did horribly, the prophets, the destructions, the rescues, the idolatries, the repentance, the sermons, all the stuff. And then Jesus shows up, his life, his miracles, his teaching, his death, his resurrection, and then the unfolding message of the good news throughout the world. That's Acts 1 and 2. And that really kind of brings us up to Revelation. And now this scroll is going to tell us how this is going to happen. But it's not just going to tell us what's going to happen. It's also, when we open it, or when we don't open it, when the Lamb opens it, it's going to bring it about. Got me? So it's not just revealing what it is, it's also bringing it about. The good guys are going to win. The bad guys are going to get what they deserve. We're going to fight through all this conflict, this messy conflict. We're going to get to a resolution. And then at the end, everything is going to be settled. Everything is going to be made right again. So the first thing he sees is a scroll. And based on what chapter 6 and the following chapters talk about, this scroll is the script that's going to lay out and then carry out God's plans to end human history. It's a big deal, this scroll. But chapter 5, verses 2 through 4, talk about a crisis. So we have the scroll, we look at it and we learn some things about it just from looking at it. And now we have this crisis. Take a look at verse 2. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. So what's the crisis? The crisis, and you guys probably can follow along this just fine. In fact, I know half a dozen of you that probably have already filled in this blank without me even saying it. But no human has the right to open the scroll. No human has the right. The question is, who's worthy? Who has the right? Who is authorized? Who has the power? Who has the authority to take this script of the end of the story and not only to find out about it, but to bring it about, right? Because you notice it says that no one was found to open the scroll or even to look into it. Like, nobody even had the right to look into the scroll and see what was written there, let alone break the seals and bring it about. Okay? And that's the next couple blanks here. No human, and by the way, living or dead, it says those who are on the earth, in heaven, or on earth, or under the earth. That's a way of talking about people who live in God's presence with him, people who live on the earth, people who live under the earth. Is not a reference to hell necessarily, but it's a reference to all those who are dead, who have been buried in the ground. So all the humans, you go back all the way to the beginning, you look forward all the way to the end. No human, living or dead at this point in human history, has the right to take a look at this scroll. All right, no human, living or dead, has the right to, number one, know how the story ends. None of us even have the right to know what's written in it. We can't even look into it. There's nobody who can say, you know what, I lived a pretty good life. I was pretty faithful to God. I was pretty awesome. I was pretty great. Let me at least just take a peek. Let me just look and see. I won't do anything about it. I'll just look. And God says, no, you're not worthy of that. But secondly, no human, living or dead, has the right to bring the story to an end. Nobody has the right to open it. Nobody has the right to set the story in motion and make sure it happens the way it's going to happen. No one can do that. Now, something else I want you to notice. Where is the scroll right now? The scroll is in God's right hand. All right? He presumably has the right to open it. He has the right to break the seals. He has the right to look on it. He has the right to know what's coming, and not only to know what's coming, but to bring it about. But God isn't doing anything. He's just sitting on his throne with his hand holding this scroll. He has chosen not to open it himself. He has the right, but is not opening it. Why is that? Because here's what I believe, based on what the story has told us so far. A human must do this. It is for a human to take this responsibility to end human history. Now, that goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. And forgive me for going all the way back to the beginning of the story as we finally get close to the end. But at the beginning of the story, how did God choose to create humanity? He created us to be his kings and queens on the earth, right? His representatives, his ambassadors. We were meant to rule the planet under his authority and under his rule. And we are the ones who decided to punt on that and give that authority to the snake. And the snake snatched it up. Later on, we come to find out the snake is empowered by Satan himself. And now Satan has the authority over the planet that we should have had. That was our responsibility. That was our birthright. It was what God made us for. And here we are at the end of human history, and there should be a human who is writing, and not writing, but bringing about the final few pages in the story of humanity. Because humans were meant to rule the world. This earth was meant to be our domain, our dominion. And the sad, tragic turn of events is that there is no one, no human, anywhere, living or dead, who was good enough, who was strong enough, who was powerful enough, who had done enough to earn the right to be the leader who would bring about the end of the human story and to bring about the redemption, to bring about the kingdom and all that stuff. It was set up for us to do it, and we failed. We abandoned our responsibility. We gave it over to someone who horribly destroyed us and has horribly destroyed and made a mockery out of our world. And this is tragic. This is sad. And how does John respond? He responds probably much the way I would. He weeps. And it says he doesn't just weep, he weeps loudly. He weeps loudly. He can't contain it. This is not just a sniffle, a Lord of the Rings tear that kind of trickles down your face as you contemplate something that is noble and sad. No, this is him sobbing. This is like ugly face sobbing. Like, you've ever had ugly face sobbing, right? Where you're like all swollen and blotchy and stuff because you just are blubbering so loud and you just can't stop. Like, you just can't stop. That's what John is experiencing right here, and that is what I think all of us who knew what was going on. Now, why is John so freaked out about this? Why is he weeping? Because there's nobody to open this scroll. So what? Just let it sit there. What's the big deal? The scroll's presumably been there in his hand for a long time. Why not just let it stay there any longer? Well, John realizes if there's no human to open it, then the first subpoint under that one is this: the story will never truly end. The story will never truly end. Now, you might think that's a good thing, right? The story just keeps going on and on and on. But here's the thing. If humanity is not in control and ruling the earth, and if humanity doesn't have the right under God's authority to have dominion over the earth, that means somebody else does. Somebody else who is destructive, who is described later on in chapter 12 as a horrific dragon who wants to devour anyone who follows God and destroy and do damage to the world as much as he possibly can in whatever time he has. That means that he gets to stay in charge. That means that he gets to call the shots. It means basically this eternal downward spiral towards chaos, sin, destruction, and oppression. That is just going to keep on happening. Now, I don't know about you, but the only way that I can keep waking up every morning and try to go about my life and try to do the right thing and try to not lose hope completely is because I believe the story one day is going to come to an end. And when the story comes to an end, I believe there's going to be a happy ending there. There's going to be a time where God fixes all the things that are broken and makes everything right. And if you don't hold on to that belief, why do you keep going? There's no reason to keep going. Unless you decide you want to be one of the ones with power, oppressing and damaging other people, and at least enjoying what pleasure you can in the short time you have on this planet, which some people, I guess, have taken that approach. But any good-hearted person, any person who's ever been touched by the damage and destruction of sin, is going to do exactly what John does. He's going to weep because he realizes if there's no human who can bring the story to an end, that means this horrifying cycle continues on and on. And one generation damages another generation, which damages another generation, and we all damage the earth together. We damage relationships, we damage society, we damage culture. If you think society is getting better and better, well, then maybe you think it's a great thing to let the story just keep going eternally without ever coming to an end. But I've lived long enough, and I get to see enough of the world to realize that this story is getting worse and worse with each chapter. It's not getting better and better. And imagine if there was no God to bring it to an end, if there was no human who could bring the story to a fitting, appropriate conclusion and tie up all the loose ends and turn everything right that has been wrong. If that's just not going to happen, well, then what's the point? It's get as much power as you can, as much pleasure as you can. Whoever you have to damage along the way to get it, you get it because life is short, life is brutal, and this is all there is. Now, by the way, there are worldviews out there that this is their approach to life. They think we came from nothing. We think we're going towards a great big nothing. And we only have a few years of life here. And I don't know how they have any hope to keep going. I don't know how they don't weep loudly along with John and just give up. But anyway, if there's no human to open it, that means the story will never end, and that is unacceptable. We need the story to come to an end. Now, that also means if no one ever opens it up, not only that, the second thing, the wicked will never be judged. There will never be an accounting for them. If we don't wrap up human history and bring it to a final conclusion where we tie up all the loose ends and right all of the things that have been wrong, then the wicked get away with it. They win. They actually win. The selfish, predatory lifestyle that they lived will be rewarded by the fact that there's no payment at the end of the battle, the end of the story, the end of the journey. Not only that, but the wicked will never be judged and the righteous will never be vindicated. Those who have suffered for doing what is right were fools. And they will be revealed to be fools because there was nobody coming at the end to reward them for being faithful. So what's the point of being faithful if in the end it doesn't work out for you? If your life is just a horrifying, sad mess, like Job's story, right? Like, why would Job stay faithful if at the end there's no redemption? If at the end there's no restoration? If at the end there's no judgment for the wicked and there's no vindication for the righteous? Well, then why stay faithful? Why not just curse God and die like his wife told him to? This is a horrifying thing. And then the third thing, humanity will never make it to the happy ending God promised for the world in his word. Basically, this entire book is predicated on a very simple idea. Life stinks. We stink. God loves us. God has found a way through the stinkiness of life to get us to the happy ending. That is the bottom line. If you had to sum it down into, I guess, one sentence, that's what you would do. You would say, we messed up the planet, life stinks, but God is going to make it to a happy ending. That is what we're holding on to. That's the hope we cling to. And the Bible has promised us that. All through the Old Testament, All through the New Testament, the entire story is filled with promises of God saying, trust me, it's going to end up well. Be faithful today, because someday in eternity, you're going to look back and realize it was the right choice to make. But if there's nobody to open up the scroll and bring human history to its appropriate conclusion, then all of that is a lie. It's all false. It all has no meaning. It has no purpose. It's empty. It's dead. And John realizes the stakes. He's like, this isn't just a coincidence or this little interesting quirk. Like, oh, look, there's a scroll. I wonder what's written in it. Oh, I guess I won't find out. Too bad. No, he knows that if there's nobody qualified to open it up, then that also means that there's never going to be an end to human history. It's just going to keep spiraling downward in chaos and destruction. And not only that, the wicked, they're going to get away with all of their wickedness. And the righteous, they're going to be revealed to be fools for being faithful to God. And it's going to be proven then that all of the things God promised were lies, or he just wasn't powerful enough to bring it about. And we're all going to crash, burn, and die. So John is upset. And I would be too. And the drama is really reaching a fevered pitch here, because you probably thought of somebody who should be qualified, who hasn't been mentioned so far. And John apparently forgot as well, because he gets caught up in this depression and sadness and mourning. And then we come to verse 5. And one of the elders said to me, John says, weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Apparently, there is somebody. So they look out, they run this search, and there's nobody found. And they just let it hang there. Can you imagine the drama? Like, they just let it hang there. Nope, didn't find anybody. There's nobody qualified. I guess it's all over. Oh, but wait. There is that one person. John gets caught up, he starts weeping, and then all of a sudden the elder says, no, John, chill, dude. It's okay. There is actually someone. There is one person. There is one human who has conquered. So the first blank is, there is someone who is worthy after all. Now, who is this worthy human who can open up the scroll? Take a look on your second page. I think we're on the second page, or maybe at the bottom of the first page. He is I'm calling this a conquering lion figure, right? When you think about a lion, you think about the king of the jungle, right? You think about majesty. You think about power. I'll never forget, I know I've told this story before, but one day we went to the Milwaukee Public Museum when I lived in Wisconsin. Just drove about 20 minutes up towards the zoo, and not the museum, went to the zoo. And they had this incredible big cats exhibit. And one of the things, behind this plexiglass, they had a full-grown male lion. And he was, I don't know if he was hungry, I don't know if he was grumpy, I don't know if he woke up on the wrong side of the rock that morning, but he decided that when he saw me come around the corner, he was going to stand, and every muscle was stretched tight, and he roared for 30 continuous seconds. And I'll tell you what, I was on the other side of probably 3-inch thick plexiglass. At least I hope it was that thick. And I was backed up against the wall, because even the plexiglass couldn't hold out the fear and terror that we should feel in the presence of such a kingly, powerful animal as a lion, especially a lion that is in its roaring. So it's a really cool picture of this conquering figure. He's a lion. And then John does what John's been doing all throughout this whole letter so far, this whole vision. He's tying that person, this lion, back to the earlier story. Did you notice that? He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Well, what is that implying? That isn't going all the way back to the story of Judah, and Judah was the son of Jacob through whom the kings of Israel would come. So you go, oh, he's the king of Israel. That's who has conquered. But then you see, he's the root of David, which reminds us of Isaiah chapter 11, one of the passages we looked up under Old Testament prophets, where they promised that someday in the future, there would be a root coming from Jesse, which was David's father. So a root of David is roughly the same kind of idea. A descendant of David who would be the king of Israel, who would conquer and bring the kingdom and bring human history to its appropriate conclusion. The elder says, John, don't weep. Don't worry. The Messiah came. The Messiah came. He came just as the Old Testament prophets promised. He came and he has conquered. And he will restore Israel and he will restore the world to its proper place. He's going to be the one to bring human history to its appropriate conclusion. Now the question is, how in the world did he do that? How did he conquer so that he had the right to open up this scroll? Well, let's look at the text, verse 6. And between the throne and the four living creatures, and among the elders, I saw a lion? No, I know this is a pretty familiar picture, so you've probably thought these thoughts before, but go along with me here. How shocking is it that he sees not a lion after the description we just had in verse 5? I mean, that's a powerful, conquering picture in verse 5. And then in verse 6, what we get is a lamb. Now, you can't get more unlion-like than a lamb. A lamb can't hurt anybody. A lamb, even if they tried to, wouldn't be able to do much damage. It's not even a full-grown sheep. It's a baby sheep. It's a baby sheep, but it's not just a sheep who has, like, that's all he can do is bang you to death. And I mean, that's boring and stuff, but it doesn't actually kill you, right? What else do we find out about this lamb? This lamb says he was standing as though it had been slain. What are you talking about? I'm talking about scars. This lamb had scars on him that implied that he had been cut, that he had been destroyed, that he had been damaged, that he had been killed. I don't know if there was still blood visible from these scars or if they were just healed over, but it was clear from looking at this lamb. This is not a spotless lamb. This is not a lamb pre-slaughter. This is a lamb post-slaughter. And he's standing, so he's alive somehow, but this lamb that was slaughtered is now alive. So you have the picture of a conquering lion figure. Here's a second image. You have a scarred lamb figure, which seems the complete opposite, right? How do you conquer if you're a lamb? A lamb can't fight anybody back. A lamb is weak. A lamb is docile, doesn't even open up its mouth when it's being killed. It's vulnerable. I mean, this is a picture of victimhood, if you've ever seen one. This is a picture of destruction, of wounds. Now, he is described as having 7 horns, which when you go back to the book of Daniel, horns seem to represent rulers or the ability to rule, which that's the blank there. He rules everything. And he has 7 eyes, which are described as the 7 spirits of God that go throughout the world. And frankly, nobody knows exactly what that means or exactly what that's talking about, except that eyes are through which we see things, right? That's how we learn things, as we look and we see and we go, oh, that's true. That's what happened. So he rules everything. He's got 7 horns, and he has 7 eyes that go all throughout the earth. So he sees everything. He knows everything. So clearly, this is a remarkable lamb. Somehow it's alive, even though it has been dead. But that's just not the picture I expected. It's a bit of and then the next blank there, the third point is, it's a bit of a paradox. The lion who has conquered actually turns out to be a lamb who was killed. Conquering, I think you kill the bad guys, right? Talk to Noah, he's 5. That's the way it works. The good guys kill the bad guys in the end. That's how it works. Or lock them in jail or whatever, you know. They beat the bad guys. That's normally how you conquer. You don't conquer by being killed. That's the definition of losing. And so you have this warrior conquering image of a lion, and then you have this wounded victim loser image of a lamb. And notice what this lamb does in verse 7. And he went and he took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. He walks up. He has the audacity to go up to the one seated on the throne, God himself, in his throne room of heaven. He has the audacity to walk up and to take that scroll right out of his hand. Now, let me ask you this. If that lamb didn't have the authority to do it, would God have allowed it to happen? Absolutely not. The very fact that the lamb took the scroll is evidence and proof that he is worthy, that he is somehow the lamb who was slain, but also the lion who has conquered. And I want you to compare this. I want to just read to you. We've looked at this passage a few different times, but in Daniel chapter 7, there's a prophecy in Daniel 7 about this. And it says in verse 9, "As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels were burning fire." Okay, and he talks about the courtroom, the throne room of God. It's describing it here. And then look down to verse 13. It says, "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." So Daniel 7 looked forward to a day when someone who is a representative of humanity, who would fulfill all those messianic promises of the other Old Testament prophets, would come before the Ancient of Days on his throne and would receive from him a kingdom that he would then rule forever. And that is exactly what John is picturing here. This Lamb is that one like the Son of Man. And he appears to the Ancient of Days. And by taking that scroll, he's receiving within that a kingdom that then someday, when the process of opening up the scroll is over, he will rule that kingdom forever. This Lamb is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is the Son of David. He is the one who was prophesied to come. He is the Anointed One. He is the Messiah. Even though his true nature is that of a lamb who was slain. Now, I want you to notice the reaction. And we're close to wrapping this up here. Hang in there. The reaction, verses 8 through 14. Verse 8, "And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, 'Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth.'" So, what's the reaction to the Lamb taking the scroll from the hand of the one sitting on the throne? Number one, all of creation worships the Lamb. All of creation worships the Lamb in expanding circles of worship. And we'll talk about those expanding circles in just 1 minute. But I want to get to the other 2 subpoints first. Okay? And then they sing a new song, it says. And their new song, they're directing it to the Lamb himself. And they're talking about why the Lamb is worthy. Why did this Lamb who was slain, why did this thing, this vulnerable, weak, sad, pathetic creature, how was it possible that they were able to conquer and be worthy to take the scroll and then eventually bring human history to its appropriate conclusion? Here's how. Actually, that's the second point. The Lamb earned the right. He earned it. He wasn't just given it. It wasn't just something he had because, well, I'm the son of my father, and when he dies, I get whatever he wanted me to have. No. He worked for this. He earned it. Now, how did he earn it? How? He conquered by dying. That's the next blank. He conquered by dying. He says, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain." You were slain. Dying is the surprise way that you conquer. But here's the thing. If we were paying attention in chapters 2 and 3, we would have already guessed that this is exactly how you conquer. Because in chapters 2 and 3, what we have is the repeated words over and over again, "to him who conquers, to him who conquers, to the one who overcomes, to the one who conquers." That word has already been used in Revelation 2 through 3 to describe not people who win at battles and fight wars against the enemy, but they're people who refuse to give up their faith in the face of intense opposition. right? Some of the churches in Revelation 2 and 3 were suffering extreme persecution from the world outside, and there's a temptation to give up on their faith and save their necks. And the people who conquer aren't the ones who have the big, stunning victory and they win the day and everybody looks at them and goes, wow, they're really impressive. The ones who conquer are the ones who survive the test and prove to be faithful and refuse to give up their faith no matter what the opposition is. And many of the people who conquer in chapters 2 and 3 are people who actually die. They're killed for their faith. And they look like the losers. But what God says is, no, that's how you win. You win by being faithful to me and holding on to what you believe and what you say you believe, no matter what the opposition is. And that's how Jesus won. Jesus passed through the test. You remember, the whole Gethsemane thing was a test. He was saying, Father, I don't want to go through this trial. I'd rather give up and run back safe home to heaven to you. And God said, stay. And Jesus said, I will stay. And he was faithful through that test. He endured till the end. And the end, yes, was his death. But that is exactly how he conquered. And then when he was brought to life, that conquering was shown to be what it was. So that's how the Lamb is back alive again. Yeah, he was killed, but because he conquered in his death, he was brought back to life. He was faithful. That's what I'm trying to get at. So the first subpoint under how he conquered by dying is this: he was faithful, no matter the personal cost. That is success. Friends, if we could get that into our heads, the church in America would do very, very well. If we could really get into our heads that true success, true conquering, is not the accomplishments, it's not the results of what you do, that faithfulness to God, obedience is success. Doing the right thing, holding on to the right beliefs, holding on to the right place, staying in that difficult marriage, loving that difficult child, working with that difficult boss, reaching out to that difficult neighbor, that staying in the battle and not quitting. That is how we conquer. Doesn't matter if the child ever comes home. Doesn't matter if the marriage ever fixes and gets perfect, wonderful, like it's a piece of heaven. It doesn't matter if the neighbor ever gets saved. The point is that you are faithful to do your job. That's how we conquer. That's how we obey. That's how we bring God's plan further and further along. That's how Jesus conquered. That's how the churches in chapters 2 and 3 conquered. And that's something that now has earned the Lamb the right to take that scroll because he was faithful. He didn't give up when he could have given up. Even though it cost him his life, even though he died, he conquered by being faithful. And then the second thing, it says, what is death accomplished? It says here back in verse 9, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. So what's the second subpoint under how did he earn the right? He earned the right by, number 2, he purchased a remnant of humanity to serve as kings and priests in God's new kingdom. Jesus, by dying, rescued X amount of people. I say X amount of people because we don't know the exact number, right? But it wasn't everybody. Sadly, not everybody is going to be in God's kingdom someday just because Jesus died for the world. It's only those who accept his offer by faith that are going to be included in this kingdom that he is setting up. But here's the good news. When Jesus died, he made it certain that those who accept him will be included in this kingdom. So all of a sudden now there are people to live and populate the kingdom. And not just to live in the kingdom, but to serve as rulers, because they're going to reign on the earth. And they're going to be priests, which means they're going to be go-betweens between God and creation. They're going to accomplish the purposes for which we were made. And Jesus' death, his defeat, actually was a victory. He actually conquered because in the dying, he scooped up millions of us and he formed us into this kingdom that will one day rule all over the earth. And it's just this amazing thing. His death accomplished so much. And I love the way this works. So first of all, you have this new song, right? It gets to our circles here. You have this new song. And the new song starts off, worthy are you because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased, blah, 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 and they will reign on the earth. That's just the 4 living creatures, right? And the 24 elders. They kind of start us off. They give us the first verse. They get the song rolling. They kind of get it going. And from what we can tell of the 4 living creatures, they can have pretty loud voices. And they sing out to Jesus. They sing out to this lamb. They sing out, you are worthy to open the scroll because you died and you purchased with your blood people to form this kingdom. And then take a look at verse 11. Then I looked, and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. That's John's way of saying, I have no idea how many people it was. I have no idea how many angels, but it was a lot. Can you imagine the thunder of that? All these heavenly angelic voices adding their voices to the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. So you add or plus all the angels. So we've got thousands upon thousands, who knows, maybe millions of beings that are now singing at their top of their lungs. And what are they saying? They're saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Like, you want to talk about an intense moment? That's going to be an intense moment. Where all of the people in heaven, all of the holy created beings in heaven, just let you hear it. Let you hear about how worthy the Lamb is. And then, that's not the end of it. There's another concentric circle. Verse 13, and I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. And the 4 living creatures said, they started it, right? They started it. They end it. The 4 living creatures say amen, and the elders fall down and worship. So you start with the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. Then you add all the angels. I imagine that's going to be pretty amazing. And then you add all created beings. And it doesn't differentiate between the good guys and the bad guys there. It just says all created beings. That means that at some point in human history, all created beings, even people who rebelled, are going to have to give God worship. They're going to have to say, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. Satan, presumably, is singing this song to God. His rebellion one day finally broken. And he joins in this cacophony, this huge, thunderous moment of praise and worship to not just the Lamb now, but to the Lamb and the one who sits on the throne. And they're brought together as equals. They both deserve the praise, the blessing, the honor, the glory, the might forever and ever. And that is where chapter 5 leaves us. Now that is an overwhelming picture. That is an overwhelming scene there. It blows my mind. I can't even capture it. I can't even really hear it in my head. I mean, it's there and it's fairly clear, but man, what would it be like to be there? Someday we may find out. We may get to be in God's presence when this moment happens. And I want to be there. And certainly afterwards, if we're not there right when this happens, we'll be there. And we'll get to see and hear a lot of the other things that are going to be happening in the rest of this book. But anyway, let me just wrap this up. What does this all mean? What is chapter 5 trying to get across to us about the whole scene and what's to come in the rest of Revelation, especially the judgments that are about to start falling on the world, and pretty post-haste here, pretty quick. In chapter 6 it starts. Okay, 3 things. Ready? These are kind of our wrap-up application points. Number 1, God's happy ending for the human story is secure. Did you catch that? His happy ending is secure. The scroll is in the hand of the Lamb. The Lamb is worthy to open it. He's going to open it. He's going to break all the seals. He's going to read down to the very last word. And the very last words are, and they all lived happily forever and ever. Amen. Those are the final words. And the fact that Jesus, the Lamb, holds this scroll in his hand and he is ready to start opening it up, is proof that the happy ending is secure. We don't go into the book of Revelation with this big fight between God and Satan to see who wins. No, before the battle begins, we know who wins. That is already settled. It's already established. The Lamb wins, and the one who sits on the throne wins, because they're the ones getting the glory and the blessing and the honor forever and ever, not any pretenders to that throne. Not any human, not any angel or demon is going to take God's place. And certainly, no matter how chaotic it might seem down here in the security camera footage part of the world, where we're watching destruction and all this stuff happening, the people who were alive at that time, no matter how crazy it must seem to them, people who know God can take comfort in the fact that the ending is secure. It's already in the hands of the Lamb. It's going to be opened. We're going to get there. I know it doesn't seem like it. I know that life seems terrible and life seems frustrating and chaotic and destructive and unpredictable, but we are going to get to the happy ending. That's number one. Number two is this. There is a hand on the wheel as the story ends. Friends, the story is about to get chaotic, crazy, destructive, filled with wrath, filled with people dying, filled with all kinds of natural disasters. It's going to make 2020 look like a walk in the park. We're going to think, wow, do we really think 2020 was that big of a deal? When this stuff starts hitting the fan, we're all going to think, oh my word, how in the world are we going to survive this? But here's the thing. There's a hand on the wheel. There's a hand on the wheel. The Lamb, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he had his hand on the wheel. This car is not out of control. It's not going to just go and crash and who knows what happens. There is someone who is guiding human history to its appropriate conclusion. Yes, from the security camera footage down here at ground level, street level, yeah, it looks really bad. It looks very chaotic. It looks like people are dying left and right, and there's no rhyme or reason, and nobody knows what's going on, and everything's crazy. But God is telling us from the very beginning in Revelations 4 and 5, someone is seated on the throne. He's holding a scroll. In the scroll is going to be the end of the human story, and there is a Lamb who has taken that scroll and has the authority to do it. He's going to bring it to the end. He has his hand on the wheel. Everything is okay. But they're going to kill me. And God goes, I know they are. And that's horrible. But my hand is on the wheel. We're making it to our destination. We're going to get there. It's okay. I don't know about you, but I need to know that there's a hand on the wheel in my life. Because sometimes the pressure keeps getting ratcheted up and up and up and up. And I'm like, I can't take any more. And what God says is, hey, guess what? I know you can't take any more, but my hand is on the wheel. I know where this thing is going. And I'm not going to take it somewhere that's going to destroy you. I'm just not going to do it. So no matter what happens, trust me, I got this. I'm in control. There's a hand on the wheel. That's my second conclusion from this chapter. And then my third one, this one's kind of cool. The point of the story, the whole story, and I'm talking about going all the way back to Genesis 1, all the stuff that happens in the middle, and the way that it ends, all of it, from beginning to the very last moment, all of it, is to reveal how great God is. What is it that they're singing about throughout the end of this chapter? All they're singing about is how the one on the throne and the Lamb deserve all the credit for everything, all the glory, all the honor, all the praise, all the blessing, all the majesty. It all goes to him. It's all him. He's the center of the universe. He's the thing we all revolve around. It's all about him. It's not about me. It's not about what happens on earth. It's not about the judgments. It's not about me and where I end up for eternity. What matters is the one on the throne and the Lamb who is there with him, equally sharing with him that responsibility and that honor and that praise and that glory and that blessing. So the whole story, the point of the whole story is to reveal how great God is. If you understand that, the Bible will make so much more sense. Because sometimes you're like, why don't you give me answers, God? And God's like, I don't want you to know all the information about how life works and why this works and why that doesn't. But I do want you to know exactly how great I am in the middle of all of these circumstances. If we can grasp that, then I think we can make peace with the fact that we don't have the answers we want for the questions we have sometimes. But then here's another cool thing. To reveal how great God is and to recruit all of creation to make a great big deal out of it. Now, what am I getting at there? These concentric circles start with a very small, narrow group of people and move out to include everybody. The goal of the story is to recruit all of creation to give God the glory he deserves for the greatness of his character and the greatness of his actions in the world, and especially as he brings human history to a conclusion. The goal is to reveal it so you can see it, and then is to recruit other people to see it and recruit other people to make a big deal out of it, to shine a light on it, to cast glory upon it. We're going to be talking a lot more about that in the Glorify series I'm working on Sunday mornings in the morning service. But that's the point of the whole story, is to focus in on God. And it's going to be tempting over the next 15 chapters or so for us to want to focus a lot of attention on the stuff happening on earth. And all I'm going to say is we're going to look at that stuff. But don't ever forget that the point of all the stuff down here on earth is to help us to see how great God is and to recruit us to make a big deal of who God is, to worship him and praise him, to join in with these people, with these beings, crying out, "Worthy is the one on the throne and the Lamb," to receive everything, to receive all the credit, all the glory, all the honor. Worship is the goal of the story. God wrote this story, and it's unfolding the way that it's unfolding to get you and me and all the people around us to see how great he is and then to join in on the worship. That's the goal. That's the purpose. John Piper is a pastor out in Minnesota, and he wrote a book. I can't remember the name of it. Delighting in God, I think it's called. And he makes the point that the glory of God is something that we're not just meant to experience, but we're meant to share with other people. And he talks about the fact, this is what he says. He says missions exist because worship doesn't exist, right? There's parts of the world that are not worshiping the one true God. And so why do we go on a mission? Why do we send the good news to parts of the world where it's not currently known? It's because we want to recruit worshipers. That's the goal. Jesus said there will one day come a day when you won't worry about what mountain you're going to worship on, but God is going to be recruiting true worshipers in spirit and in truth. That's the point. That's the goal. That's the agenda. God is trying to recruit worshipers. And the reason we do missions, the reason we reach out to our lost neighbors, the reason why we teach our kids about God is so that we can recruit more people to join us in making a big deal about God. And one day we will get to the point where all of creation joins in and praises and worships the one God who made them. Like Paul said in Philippians chapter 2, where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That is where human history is headed. And here's the cool thing. We get to get in on it early. And we get to be a part of seeing it for what it is and to recruit other people to join us in making a big deal of this God that we love. That's Revelation 5. Next week, if you come back, we're going to start to talk about what happens when the Lamb starts to pull open these seals, because crazy, crazy stuff starts happening on earth once he does that. Because the Lamb is worthy to open the scroll, to break the seals, and to bring the human story to its appropriate and God-honoring, God-worshiping conclusion. Come back next week. We'll talk a lot more about that. Lord bless you guys. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.